Well, hello there. It's Friday afternoon, and you're getting a double dose of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. If you're joining us live, thanks for tuning in. It's happy hour for some, maybe not for others, but it's Friday. We're just about a week away from the first preseason game, right? And the Bengals' first preseason game. We had real football last night, which was kind of neat to see for the first time this season. The Texans and the Bears, even though that game got called short, the Hall of Fame game, actually a pretty good game for first couple of quarters there. But this is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We've got a lot of people already tuning in live, and we are going to do some listener questions live. So you got to get those to us. We'll tell you how to do that in just a second. I am Anthony. He is John. We have ground through, I don't know the proper English, some frustrations, some personal life frustrations today to be here, and we haven't done one of these in a long time, so it's good to be with you, good to be with the listeners and getting some questions in.
Powered through, I think, is the verbiage I would go with there, but we're here now, and my God, I don't even remember the last time we did listener questions. It's been a long off season. Football was fun last night. Colin Johnson, the next Randy Moss, apparently, for the Chicago Bears, and what was it? It was Mark Rippon's nephew, the Super Bowl winner for Washington. Brett Rippon. Yeah. He was slinging it. He was throwing some dimes. But 1 week until the Bengals play their first preseason game against Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm surprised I knew that, actually.
Yeah, and oh boy, it's going to be yet again the Baker Mayfield show. As if the Bengals hadn't had enough of Baker Mayfield over the years, but that's okay. It's preseason. There probably won't be a lot of them, but the Bengals starters are probably set to play here a little bit more than you think here in this first preseason game. So that's kind of interesting and definitely a pivot from before. So we're gonna take some listener questions here. And by the way, I kind of want to throw this caveat out there. When we take the questions and when we say we're taking questions, this isn't meant to sound like we're on our high horse and we're answering all of your questions. This is like, hey, let's talk about, like, we're hanging out at a bar or hanging out at a restaurant, and you give us a question, and let's kind of shoot the stuff about it, right? So that's kind of the intention here. You can get your questions to us a number of ways. The obinsider@gmail.com. You can tweet us at CJAnthonyCUI or at John__ Sheeran or at Bengals OBI. You can get those there. There is a comment thread running on a post on Cincy Jungle, so you can get that. And of course, on the live chats through YouTube and Facebook, get those to us. And I think we're back streaming to Cincy Jungle's Twitter, which is nice. So check that out. But at any rate, get us some questions. We'll be here for a little while, and we'll talk about some fun things. And I think, John, you already had one sent to you via Twitter, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so we had at Boise Bengal, David Gabbard, really cool guy on Twitter. He was asking about, have any rookie undrafted free agents made any noise in training camp? I haven't heard anything. I know it's early. We usually have to wait until the first preseason game for an underdog hero. He used Damian Willis as an example to emerge. And I feel like that is standard operating procedure. Typically it is hard for those guys who are, dealing with at best second string reps. It's hard for them to really stand out until they get under the lights and the cameras on them for the preseason, and they play most of those games. So yeah, I wouldn't say there's like a single guy that's really standing out. I guess, Anthony, like two names I think to watch for who I have heard about practicing: Cole Burgess, the wide receiver out of Dan Pitcher's an alum, like SUNY Cortland up in New York. Really explosive receiver, a little bit undersized, but I think he's been kind of playing on the third and fourth string. And wide receivers is typically a position that gets a lot of attention, gets a lot of hype at this time of year. And also, just with all the injuries going on at defensive end, you have both Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard dealing with minor things. Cam Sample potentially has a more serious injury that he's dealing with. So depth at that position is not looking great, which is why a guy like Justin Blazek, who was an undrafted guy out of a small school out of Wisconsin, kind of that 34 outside linebacker, but he's going to get more reps just because they have next to nothing behind, their starters. And like it's Miles Murphy and Joseph Asai taking starters reps, but outside of them, like I think Blazek's probably next man up in terms of being like in the second string now for just the guys who are available. So if we haven't really heard anything from him, I'm sure he'll get more run in practice, and I'm sure they're going to try to reserve both Hendrickson and Hubbard in the preseason. So we should see him, Blazek, that is, a lot in week 1.
Yeah, that's where I was going to kind of first land on. And then, you have to also look at, a lot of the hype machine's running strong for Brad Robbins right now. And they're, they're kind of saying the right things about him, and he's really dedicated himself this offseason to be better, and good for him. He, that's major kudos to him. But there are a couple of, free agent punters that the Bengals added, and they will probably get some time. You would think there's probably some sort of a rotation they've got figured out in these preseason games. So McNamara was a guy that, some teams felt had a draftable grade this year. They just brought in another guy. So, it's like, hey, let's maybe keep an eye on that. I know punter isn't the most sexy position per se, but, kickers and punters are players too.
Yeah, I think Ryan Racal, I still need to figure out how to say his last name. He was a rookie out of BYU. He's a bit on the older side because, that's how they roll out there in Utah. But he was originally signed by the Chiefs this offseason as an undrafted guy, just like Austin McNamara was signed by the Bengals as an undrafted free agent. He then, Ryan Racal, lost the battle to punk god Matt Arisia in Kansas City. I think it was like in June. So they probably decided that just after OTAs or whatever. And then Bengals had an extra roster spot to kind of fill out. They were at 89. They figured, why not just bring in another punter here? Very rarely do you see 3 punters on the roster at any point in time, at any point during the offseason or the regular season. But I truly think that is just the most open competition on the entire roster. I don't think Brad Robbins is safe at all after the rookie season that he had. McNamara was really good in college, but so is Racal. I think both of their production and their averages, their nets, whatever you want to look at for punter production, it was pretty similar. So I think both of them are going to get an equal chance to kind of boot Robbins out of there.
That is a quietly critical area of the team that needs to improve. We talk about obviously the health of the stars and, the Bengals diversifying a bit on offense and, obviously shoring up some areas, interior defensive line, safety, and, some of the issues that plagued them on defense last year. But this is there was this snowball effect a lot of times in some of these games that the Bengals couldn't get out of their way, right? It's the old, 3 and out or short drive type of thing. Defense gets, bad punt. Defense gets on the field, bad field position, lets up points, right? It's that snowball effect where you go, man, or defense gets a stop, offense stalls out real quickly again, defense goes back out there, and after a nice stand or turnover, what have you, there are instances where they would go out there and have to, be right back out there again and try and be Superman, and it didn't work. So that equation needs to steady itself. It is a 3-phase game, as we know, and some of these shanked punts or these balls that have good hang time but don't go very far that we saw from Robbins last year, that's got to change. And again, kudos to him. He's apparently taking it very seriously this offseason. He's taken note that the Bengals have brought in competition and a lot of it for him. So, that's an area that needs to be shored up for sure.
And yeah, just like you said, just make it doesn't have to be the strength of the team, but just make it more than the total liability that it's been for the past. It's been a revolving door, kind of like the tight end position. So they're looking for a long-term answer. Surprise, surprise. We have a very generous donation.
Yes.
By our guy, Mr. Whisper. And he's asking
the director of generosity for the Orange and Black Insider. That guy.
The director, the CEO, the CFO, whatever title you want to name it. But he's asking about Amarius Mims. He's reading articles talking about how good Amarius Mims looks as a rookie. Do you think this is typical media fluff, or are you hearing or seeing the same? Well, we have seen a lot from Amarius Mims, Anthony. I had a little scare yesterday because I think it was 96 degrees and he couldn't quite handle the heat like a lot of players on Thursday afternoon, so he left practice. But other than that, I think he has been really good, really solid in camp. It's only been 2 or 3 padded practices so far, but this is a guy who's obviously very experienced in the practice setting, going up against elite athletes. You know, he played at Georgia for 3 years, and that was his arena when he wasn't playing. He only had 8 starts to his name, so he's used to going up against really good competition. And that athleticism really does translate in these settings as well. It's just so easy for him to get out of his stance, and then he has so much power in his core. He's able to anchor, and that's why like the best guy he's gone up against so far is Miles Murphy, and Miles Murphy's game is predicated on explosion, translating speed to power with the bull rush, and Murphy's just not gaining anything out of it because Amarius Mims is 6'8", 350 pounds, and he's still as nimble as any tackle in the NFL, and I would put money on that based off the athleticism data. So it is so far so good for Mims, but he's the first round pick. There's obviously a lot of hype that is attached to him anyways, so seeing him going up against edges that he's not, practicing with and isn't familiar with, that's going to be a big test for him in the preseason.
So for me, it's both. To answer the direct question that Mr. Whisper asked, which is it fluff or is he that good? To me, it's both. I think it is propping up a young player and a little bit of, playing, talking him up a little bit. But I think there is also where there's smoke, there's fire, and he has looked very good in practice. He has, to me, I don't want to say I'm pleasantly surprised because I know that the skill set was there. It's just, again, those limited snaps, the limited playing time in college that just kind of scared you. Quite honestly, scared a lot of teams off from him in this class. I mean, any other class, he consistently put out that tape for a year to 2 years and didn't have some of the health stuff and, limited snaps, all that kind of stuff. He's likely the first tackle off the board with that RAS profile and everything. Right. So, I mean, this is a guy that has all of the tools. It's a matter of experience. It's a matter of getting in there and playing well. But this is where I also get still a little cautious. And again, I still think he's going to be a really good player. That there are too many tools here that say he's going to flop. I think he will. I think his floor is pretty good and his ceiling is like excellent, elite. Right. But I think it's a matter of time. You maybe have to be a little more patient. And I still caution that this is a guy who will be tasked in going up against that Baltimore Ravens defensive front where they can get pressure from all kinds of different places. TJ Watt twice a year, if not more. Myles Garrett twice a year, if not more. So that's unfortunately the real barometer. And that's going to be in the regular season. That's not going to be in the preseason. So I think there's a lot there. I know there's a lot there. I think the sky's the limit for him. I just want to be cautious saying right out of the gate, he's going to be a star. Can he be? Sure. Absolutely. He's got the tools for it. But when you got to see him against that top talent and how he performs against them, because that's who he's going to face pretty much week in, week out in the regular season.
It's not even like a him thing. For me, it's just the position that he plays. It's so rare for rookies at any offensive line position to come in immediately and play up to their potential. It took Penei Sewell a year to really get his feet settled. Rashawn Slater was kind of the same way. Christian Darrisaw, two of those guys are now like the highest paid tackles of their position. Tristan Wirfs is like an exception. He just immediately came in and was elite. I guess it's what happens when you train and develop at Iowa. But no, like the talent that Mims has is very equal to those guys. But obviously, the more exposure that he has, the quicker he will run into mistakes, and the quicker he has the chance to learn from him and develop. And I think what I've enjoyed just from Mims is just getting to know him. And I'm glad that the media is talking to him a lot and picking his brain on how his mind works and everything, because that was the one thing that I guess really none of us really knew. Like, we didn't really know the person Amarius Mims. We just knew the limited tape and the injury history with him, and I think that kind of scared people off. But the more that you talk to him and the more that you kind of gauge what he's saying and how his mind works and how his process is, there's just nothing but to love him and just to really think that this guy has what it takes. He has the it factor to reach his potential, but that's so far off from now. It's just the third training camp practice at pads.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Whisper, on that. Please get your questions to us at CJ Anthony CUI at John_Sheeran. We'll keep an eye on the Cincy Jungle. Unfortunately, our former phone number is not working for calls or texts, so we can't do that. But get us to, and of course, the super chats in YouTube get preferential treatment because they are just nice symbols of generosity that come our way. So we appreciate that. But thank you again, Mr. Whisper, for being a constant supporter. If Mr. Whisper is the director of generosity for the show, then Natty Ron is our show's hype man. He always brings it, writing in caps, tuning into a lot of our live shows, and we really appreciate that. And also very, very passionate about the Bengals in the city of Cincinnati, as evidenced by Natty in his YouTube handle. So who will be wide receiver 3? Pretty straightforward question. Burton and he says, can Burton really be number 3? Because Yoshi's coming for that spot. Interesting stuff, and credit to Dan Horde on some of this inside information and or a refresher on some of it regarding Yoshi. He worked with a pass catching specialist, a receiving specialist this entire offseason to not do so much of the body catching. It's funny. One of the more successful Bengals receivers, especially in recent history, was Marvin Jones. And Marvin Jones seemed to catch a lot of balls against his body throughout his career, but it never really, he never had a problem with drops really that I can remember, or, and he had a very, very, for where he was drafted, he had an outstanding career. Marvin Jones did. So, but this is something that Yoshi felt that he needed to work with in terms of extending the hands, catching the ball with the hands and not so much against the body type of thing. So he worked all off season on that. Apparently it's paying off in spades because he is having one hell of a camp right now. But we talked about this too with Aaron Schatz the other day, John, when he was on our program. I mean, he brought up Trenton Irwin. We didn't even talk about Trenton Irwin, and he brought him up saying, like, man, when that guy's number's called, he shows up, and he does. And so now, again, kind of like what we're talking about, not to the same extent with tight end, because there's still some unknowns with rookies and that sort of thing in that group, but you're talking about a position group that is just incredibly deep, especially when everybody's healthy. And I don't know, that number 3 role might be by committee, like we've seen on some of these other position groups this year.
That's what's the most exciting to me, just because I think it would have been easy. It was easy for me to say, like, oh, Jermaine Burton's drafted in the 3rd round. He's uberly talented. He's got experience against these top, colleges and top cornerbacks in college. So he's like the most ready to, translate into that role as a starter, or like a de facto starter. And you kind of forget that Yoshi is an elite athlete in his own right. And, the strides that he made as a rookie put him on track to be where he is now. But of course, him going the extra mile in training with, I believe his name is Drew Lieberman, who's the receiver trainer specialist, along with Chase Brown, that has just really set him up to just not drop anything at camp and just go wherever he's told to go in terms of alignment on the field, and just develop trust with Joe Burrow first and foremost. And the fact that, Burrow missed so much time last year and it wasn't himself, I think it really impacted it limited how successful Yoshi could have been as a rookie, despite, I think, exceeding expectations in some regards. So he definitely, I would say at this point, has the inside track. If he had to put one name to that role at the receiver position, because you could technically list Mike Gesicki as the potential number 3 option because he's going to take most of his snaps in the slot. So if there is a receiver who I would say has the inside track, it's probably Yoshi. And that also has to do with, Jermaine Burton unfortunately suffered an ankle injury on Thursday. He didn't practice Friday. It's not supposed to be serious. He might be back at practice next week. Their next practice is Sunday. So we don't know when Burton is going to come back, but any missed reps that he has just gives Yoshi more chances to just develop rapport and just to keep putting quality film out there, because it does seem like it's just overwhelmingly positive with him. And, I think we can label it to some degree of just training camp hype, but I mean, elite athletes, when they learn how to use their bodies and things start to slow down for them, like, they can just do things that other players can't. And that's the advantage that Yoshi has over a lot of these other receivers who are really talented alongside him.
I want to credit Jordan Schultz at Schultz_report on Twitter He did tweet out, I believe yesterday, good news on Bengals rookie Jermaine Burton. I'm told the former Alabama star and third-round pick suffered only a, quote, ankle tweak and left practice nearly as a precaution. Quote, he'll be fine, said a source. And it looked like that too, as
Right.
if you saw the footage when he was coming off of the training table. I mean, he was putting weight on it. He didn't need help. It wasn't a cart type of thing. He walked off, but very smart for the Bengals to just kind of keep it precautionary with him. But I hate to go back into the archives, but this is kind of, again, not to the same degree, I guess, but when you go back to that 05 Bengals team, and you have Chad, you have Hoosh, you have Chris Henry, you have Kelly Washington, you have Kevin Walter. I mean, you were very, very deep at wide receiver, so much so that, if they did on the rare occasion clamp down on Chad or something like that, you had a lot of different other options. And now that team was a little, and I liked Reggie Kelly a lot, but that team was a little weaker in pass catching tight ends. And I think this team now has a boost in that area, at the pass catching tight end spot. So I think there's a lot to like here. I think, it's early. It's a little early to, crown someone a number 3, but I do think that there's going to be you're going to see a lot of guys out there at different times and in different packages. I think they trust a lot of these guys. They've already shown that they have early trust in Jermaine Burton in his hands. Has he dropped a pass in camp yet? Did we track that? I
don't know if they publicize that as much, but I did want to say, because you brought up Aaron Schatz bringing up Trent Irwin. And I think with Irwin, it's like he's reliable in the sense that you just don't want to put too much on his plate. But if you give him like the 1 to 2 targets a game where he just finds the soft spot of the defense, that's like money. And the more that you ask him to do, I think the more that his lack of dynamicism kind of gets exposed. But if you're in a position where Trent Irwin is like your 5th best receiver, that is a really good room, because there's not a lot of wide receiver. If we want to run down the 32 wide receiver 5s, Trent Irwin's probably number 1 out of that list. And then outside of all of this is Charlie Jones, who this time last year suffered a torn labrum and was kind of losing steam compared to Yoshi in comparison and in respect. And, Zach Taylor kind of made an emphasis of saying yeah, this guy's had a really strong camp. He highlighted a play that he made in a team meeting, on top of the fact that he's gained 5 pounds of muscle. It's the same thing with Yoshi in the sense of the game is slowing down for him as well. And he's playing faster, and he looks like the Purdue version of Charlie Jones, who would just be a deep threat and would have a bigger catch radius than people would give him credit for his size. So you are easily 6 deep at this point, of 6 guys that you could rely on throughout the game. And obviously not with 10 targets each and anything like that, but it was a problem when Irwin was kind of thrusted into these larger roles, because you couldn't rely on outside of Chase and Higgins to kind of get open deep, and that would create some problems with the offense. But now you're in a position where all these guys, I think, are set to take on roles that fit their skill set, and that's what's going to make all of them better.
I think a lot of people forget, and you look at the amount of targets that Irwin had in the year. They're pretty paltry throughout, but I think he had a little bit of a bigger role in 22, and then this last year, a little bit less. But I think a lot of people forget how big of an impact he had on that Arizona Cardinals game. Chase had the touchdowns, and there were I think Mixon had some nice plays, and there were a lot of other players making plays in that game. But man, I mean, he had Trent Irwin had 10 targets in that game. And he had 8 catches for 60 yards, and I remember him converting a number of plays to first downs, and he was a quietly critical player in that win. And that win was really necessary at that time, because the Bengals had struggled out of the gate, and Burrow was finally starting to kind of show that he was healthy a little bit. That was one of the first games where you go, okay, he's a little bit back there. So yeah, anyway, I mean, we're harping on Irwin a lot, but I think it's a good problem that the Bengals have in that position group, a lot of talent going forward. I want to ask about, there's a couple of things that have kind of been, I was at that game too, Natty Ron. I was at that game. I want to ask you a couple. What do you think about? And again, we have to kind of see what the snap load is there. But what do you think about the Bengals starters and presumably Joe Burrow playing in the first preseason game, even if it's a series or something like that? What's your gut feeling on all of that?
Feeling of how much they're going to play, or just like thoughts of like,
risk, everything. Yeah, just your
yeah,
overarching thoughts about it.
I think just getting a series down, I think would be good for week one. Just you do it, you do install, you run through like 2 minute drills in camp, and you kind of create the environment, the scenario of going through like a drive and the communication and the play calls and everything like that. But once you're in the game, like it's for real. Even if it's just a preseason game at the end of the day, the process of just doing it all, I think just doing that once, at least once a week throughout the preseason can just get them perspective and experience, even if these guys have been doing it for a long time. You're back in the swing of things. It's what the preseason is for. It's what it always used to be, specifically in the Marvin Lewis era when AJ Green had like 1,000 preseason snaps or something like that, and Jamar Chase has only played like 2 games. Like it's just like that experience matters, and I do agree in the sense that like you don't want to overplay these guys because at the end of the day, an injury is not worth it. But just getting the process down of like going through a drive and getting the communication, like they just haven't had that in the past couple of years, and I think that's attributed to their slow starts, not just the health wise, but just making sure that like the little things are just down pat, so then you're playing free and you're not doing it all for the first time when it counts.
So I'm in agreement with all of what you just said here, and I'm just going to add a little bit to it. It's not just the, hey, let's make sure that these guys, I mean, a lot of these guys, Burrow, Higgins, Chase, they've played together for a long time. I mean, it's, that rapport will go, but it's always nice to kind of keep sharp. But there are new players on this offense now. There's some different things they are trying out on offense now. You're talking about basically one large role at the running back position that's got a new player in it. You've got another couple of ancillary roles at wide receiver that you've got some new people at, and then of course you've got Mike Gesicki in there, and so there's some new faces in there, and I think you can talk about the risk and injury risk and all that kind of stuff. I think they will minimize that to the umpteenth degree that they can, especially with Joe Burrow. But I think again, when you look at just the slow starts, the issues that this team has had the last couple of years, it's like, man, you can't really afford that. You can't really afford that again this year and bank on a major streak down the pike there. So I'm for it. I think it really needs to be managed well, and I think there needs to be a lot of monitoring as to how much time and the types of plays they are running to minimize risk, hits, etc. But I think it's necessary.
Yeah, and I think the starting group on the offensive line, I think will do a good job of making sure that things are kind of up to speed and the protection is necessary there. Wanted to get to Dan the Man's question from earlier in the show. He's asking about players on the bubble that we think will benefit the most in terms of making the final roster, particularly by the new kickoff rule. This is an interesting question, Anthony. There's a name in mind that I'm thinking of that I've heard has been practicing on the kickoff coverage team or just the kickoff return team, because it's not just about putting big bodies up against these guys to fill these gaps, but it's also there's just such an emphasis on blocking, and because you're not like running at the snap and you're not trying to get into place and everything like that, it's just from a standstill. That's why you see guys like Trey Hill being on the kickoff return team as like a blocker. And I think out of all the roster bubble guys who are kind of in this scenario, he stands out the most, because if they were to go to 10 offensive linemen again, I think he would probably be offensive lineman number 10. I would still bet that Matt Lee becomes the backup center. I think he's just going to have a better preseason compared to Trey Hill. But if they're giving Trey Hill like a chance to make the team via this type of role, I think he's one of the guys that would stand to benefit the most, just because, like, again, you don't think of offensive linemen and kickoff returns, but now it's a whole new world, and you need guys like that can kind of open up lanes up the middle.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a number of players that you could say, okay, offensive linemen that are bubble guys, where you go, is that kind of their last chance with the team in terms of making it this year? Uh, you know, who is it? Deontay Smith is another one. Maybe that could get a shot at that kind of role. I mean, we've talked about Jackson Carman trying to latch on to some kind of role there. I mean, there's all these kinds of players like that where you go, man, maybe this is their last ditch effort to really kind of hang on to the team. Trey Hill's a great choice, though. I think Trey Hill's a great choice there. And I think also because of the versatility of playing, potential to play guard, potential to play center, that sort of thing, that's what makes those guys valuable. And I'll say this again, these rule changes now really will re-emphasize the influence that Darren Simmons has on final roster construction. And you and I have talked about this till we're blue in the face on this show, but he has a lot of sway, influence, and respect, not only on this team and from its front office, but around the league. I mean, he kind of had for a while there, he had a couple of head coaching job interests and that sort of thing around the league. I think that's cooled a little bit with the punting issues that have plagued the team for the past 3-4 years. But, again, I think that's why you see some of these spots at the back end of rosters. You go, oh, okay. Your DJ Ivies and these other players where you go, man, he thinks he could use these players and they can be effective for him on coverage teams, on return teams, that sort of thing. So I think there's some fringe offensive linemen that, as you said, you need kind of bodies to be up there and block with these new rules. So I think that's a really good spot to look at where you go, oh man, maybe they went a little heavier at this spot than I anticipated, especially when we're talking about deep tight end wide receiver groups.
Yeah, and I think that is a scenario, a path of which 5 tight ends can make the team. I feel like tight end is another position that
there you go
valued across the league there. And I think, obviously the bigger the guys, the better. And like the Bengals tight end group we talked about it a couple days ago, like there's kind of an archetype of like receiver first, blocker second. But I still think obviously Drew Sample is going to get plenty of run time there. And I think depth there is just going to be important anyways, because again, like kickoff returns, it's just been such an afterthought that you're on the field, but you're not doing anything because the ball's just booted out to the back of the end zone. So now these guys are going to be taking on contact and colliding with each other like 6 or 7 more times in a game. So like there's potential where, guys get banged up and you need other guys to step up. And that could be a position that is just, you're required to have more depth there just because you need quality guys there because that play does matter now.
Yeah. And I will say, I don't know if anybody watched the game last night, but the first look at what new kickoffs looked like, it was different. It definitely looked different. So that's a really insightful question. I like that one a lot because it is one of those things again where you go, oh man, you got to retweak your line of thinking. If you're a front office, if you're a coach, that sort of thing, okay, we know who for the most part, we know pretty much all of the roster that we're keeping. Now we've got a slate of spots towards the back end of these position groups that we need to sort out. And now, oh, by the way, these rule changes really affect the way that we may construct some of these spots. So very, very insightful question. I like that. We're going to be here a little bit longer. This is the Orange and Black Insider. You can get this show on the Believe Network, on the Believe in Cincy channel. If you like the audio side of things, iTunes and Spotify and all the major ones, we are there. You got to go resubscribe. If you like the audio side of things, you got to go resubscribe to the Believe in Cincy channel. Also leave us a rating too. Trying to unfortunately rebuild the feed a little bit because we had to kind of start over with the move, but we've had some people continue to listen and subscribe. So we appreciate that. So please do that. That's where you can get this show, Talking Football with Bengal Jim and Friends, 3 and Out with Jason and Kevin, as well as Matt and Willie No Ball with the coach, Matt Minnick, and Willie Lutz, new to our slate of podcasts. We're happy to have him. We got to do a little crossover episode with those guys and properly welcome Willie, properly welcome him. And of course, if you like the video side, Cincy Jungle's Facebook, we stream live. We stream to a number of Twitter accounts. I think we're back on Cincy Jungle now, that Twitter account. So check that out. And of course, underneath John, if you like the YouTube side, there is a show icon underneath that Cincy Jungle icon to subscribe, hit, do the whole thing, the subscribe, the bell, the thumbs up, all the stuff. We make it jump through hoops, but I promise you we're bringing you stuff and hopefully you feel like it's worth it. So please do that. We appreciate all the support. You get all of our shows and the 3 and Out shows on our YouTube channel as well. So check all of that out. We appreciate it. We'll be here just a little bit longer. I'll scroll through some more questions here in just a minute, John, but one thing I wanted to bring up to you, is a sentiment that someone commented. We were talking on our Twitter account. We brought up, hey, go check out the episode we had with Aaron Schatz earlier this week, and he's talking about Jake Browning and the outlook and all that, and we had someone kind of say basically Jake Browning was trash. Here, I'll try and see if I can pull this up here.
Good start.
Jake Browning was trash. He has no touch in his pass, and lucky for me, all of the jump balls he threw up there, our great receivers came down with more than they should have. And look
for him.
I'm not bringing this up to blast this person. I just found it to be, I just didn't really feel the same way. And so there were moments where you go, okay, bad decision, trying to do too much. Yeah, T-bailed you out a couple of times in the Minnesota game. I get it. But we were resigned to the fact that the back half of that schedule, the back half of football that we were going to witness was going to be miserable, right? When Burrow went down, we were resigned to that. I was like, how, quite honestly, and I don't like to say this on the air, but I'm like, how am I going to carry this show? You and I, how are we going to carry this show on for 8 weeks? However, I forget how many games it was, but I'm like, how, because I felt that you and I were going to sit here and talk about some miserable looking football, and it was not that. And I think Browning surprised us all in, what was it? 12 passing touchdowns, seven interceptions. He had another couple of touchdowns on the ground. Rating was okay. PFF rating was okay. For a backup quarterback that you didn't really know really truly what you had, was it all pro stuff? No, but the Bengals were knocking on the door of the playoffs with him towards the end of the year there.
It was such a fascinating year. Just looking back at, he was competing with Trevor Siemian throughout the offseason, and that battle hadn't really been decided until the very end because neither one was really looking good in practice until Browning kind of separated himself a little bit. But there was a reason why no one felt confident in Browning starting for Burrow in the first 4 or 5 games, like Jamar Chase had suggested that Burrow sit those games out because they just didn't have any faith in him. And then the first time that Browning came in, he was objectively terrible because he was trying to run the Joe Burrow offense against the Steelers. And that game turned out exactly how a lot of people expected it to. But I think you can separate backup quarterbacks into a couple tiers. Like, if your backup can run the same offense, not as efficiently, but effective enough to keep you in the game, I think that's a really good backup. If your backup can just run an alter offense and be effective and efficient and make good decisions, that's like a quality backup. But if your backup can do neither of those things, then you shouldn't be your number 2. I think Jake Browning does fall in the middle because the offense definitely 100% was changed drastically to the point where it was almost like training wheels. And I don't mean that to demean Jake Browning, but it was clear that he couldn't go into empty and make all these pre-snap reads and do the complex things that Joe Burrow is so good at. And it's why he's worth $55 million a year. But like you said, the production was the production. And once the offense kind of changed and molded around to his skill set, you still need to operate the offense and run it effectively. And that's what he did for consecutive weeks. And I think in that Vikings game, obviously the jump ball to T. Higgins was really all T. Higgins. But in that game, I think like that they were down. And I think Browning made a lot of gutsy throws and decisions to keep them in that game. And you need that aggressiveness from your backup quarterback or just from your quarterback in general to put yourself in that position. So I think trash. No, I think he's a quality backup, but there's definitely a lot of nuance with it. And I think in regards to like DVOA and Shots' opinion, the efficiency was definitely there. And I think that's why he was propping up Jake Browning. But obviously you look at the film and it's night and day for a lot of things between Browning and like a starter for sure.
Agreed. And I do think that you are right that I don't know that I fully agree with the training wheels type of assessment, but I think they really pared things down for him to say, okay, yes, these are the handful of things that you do well. Let's keep it to that. And you saw a lot of rollouts, a lot of play action, a lot of bootlegs. And then, he did some of the stuff that, you felt like Burrow kind of does a little bit with his legs, ad-libbed a little bit, got you some yards, got you some first downs. And that became, something that you like to see. You look at, the Jaguars game, let's say, for instance, after 3 quarters, Bengals were down by a touchdown. Bengals come back and score 13 in the 4th quarter and overtime combined to win that game. That was a game where you go, man, season's done. You lose this one. Right. And then that Minnesota game, what were they down 14, if not more? I maybe 20. I can't remember offhand. I'll have to look that up, but they were down multiple possessions in that game. And you're like, this is the season. All right. This is where it unravels. And, it was kind of a fun little ride for a little bit. And lo and behold, he came up, played, made some plays. The other players made plays with him. The defense stepped up and made crazy turnovers that were super timely. And I mean, remember BJ Hill in that game? So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff where you go, okay, stuff kind of fell his way, but he also made stuff happen here and there. So I want to kind of give him praise, because that, I'm telling you, based on what we saw in preseason, based on him never really getting playing time or anything like that, that season could have just been absolutely miserable. Yep. And here we go. We're sitting here now going, they were so close. They were so close to making the playoffs, right? A game or two away, right? And you're like, man. But I will say this. You mentioned the Steelers game, the 2 Steelers games that he played, and it was against a quality defense, quality defensive line, et cetera, et cetera. Those are pretty miserable. I mean, those were not good performances by him, by the team in general. So, you could look at that and say, well, there's kind of the warts there. But again, I think Dan, the man in our live chat, said, again, you're looking at somebody that maybe can keep you afloat for half a month to a month if you absolutely need him to. Sure. Yeah, he can keep your season afloat, I think. And he proved that last year.
Yeah. And now they have experience of like what works and what doesn't. And that is extremely valuable. And now you're not going into it blind. And at the end of the day, like, you still have to be able to execute. And I think for what he was asked to do when they kind of got on the same page, he was doing that better than most quarterbacks in the NFL. And that's a testament to the coaching staff. It's a testament to his ability to adapt on the fly. So the entire situation, from the coaches to Browning himself, it deserves immense praise for, like you said, just keeping the season afloat.
Yeah. Any other questions you see that we did not get to that we want to get to? I'm kind of scouring and looking at a few things, so I didn't truly see, but do you see something else that we want to get to here?
We had a question from Matthew Rowe. I was just asking about an injury update. Yeah, it's probably important to do. So like there were like 4 separate injury instances that happened Thursday, again, when it was 96 degrees, extremely humid. I think a couple players cramped during it. Amarius Mims went out just with due to the heat, but he was back in practice Friday, so all good there. Jermaine Burton, like Anthony said, tweaked his ankle, not serious. He's probably going to return, and maybe the heat may have had something to do with that as well. Mike Hilton suffered like a minor leg injury, but he was back practicing like a handful of plays later. And then Cam Sample was carted off the field with what looked like a lower leg injury. Could be his knee, could be his calf, but he was seen in the locker room on a scooter. I believe DJ Ivy and Devonta Maxwell, they're on the rehab field on the physically unable to perform list. Trent Brown is still on the NFI list. I think he's also been on the rehab field. So a lot of minor injuries that the Bengals are dealing with right now. We're still waiting to see if it's serious for Cam Sample.
And Eric Allback, we said that on a show earlier this week too. Yeah, the Sample thing, that's, I mean, it's a rotational guy. It's depth, and it's a guy who's played in big games and had a couple of plays in these big games before. So if that is I don't know what that is at this point in time, but hopefully it's not overly serious. We will see, but that seems to be, knock on wood, the only real serious seeming one at this point. Sorry, a bug flew right by my face. Yeah, it was a bug flew right by me. I was like, whoa, was that a bee? Yeah, that's the stuff you get on the live show, ladies and gentlemen. You get me flinching at bugs. Real quick, the bright spot with Pastor Dave Hammond on Facebook. Has Burrow gained weight? Will it hurt his speed? Burrow did bulk up a little bit, right? He added some muscle, I think, a little bit this offseason, along with his new hairstyle. So there's that. I don't think it hurts the speed. I mean, it really, for me, he's not a burner speed guy anyway. It's more savvy and knowing how to read a defense and he's fast enough, right? I mean, so to me, if he loses a touch, I don't think that really affects the ability to scramble or anything like that. And quite honestly, you still want that to take place. You still want that to be in his repertoire of how he plays the game. But we got to start minimizing these hits on him. So if it does slow him down, and it causes him to pause a little bit on some of these where he would take a hit, I'd be okay with that.
To kind of using like a Madden analogy, if his speed was like, I don't even know what a speed rating is on Madden. I would guess it's like 81, 82. Maybe it drops to 80. But if you chop all your hair off, maybe that offsets the weight gained. So I don't know. I think he's still going to be fine. I don't like, I think the weight was more of like that was an underrated aspect of his offseason. He mentioned like his offseason started 10 weeks earlier than everyone else's, and he was still able to do weight training despite the wrist injury. So he kind of got a head start on that whole process. And I think that kind of led to him putting on a lot of muscle. And part of the first week of training camp was him kind of adjusting to his arm strength. And all of a sudden now he's throwing off platform across his body, 50 yards of carry right in the arms of Shedrick Jackson. I've never seen Joe. If you guys haven't seen that clip of that throw, I wrote an article about it on A2Zsports.com, and it was spectacular. We've seen a lot of great throws from Joe, but those types of throws you typically only see from like the best arms in the NFL. And we've seen a lot of crazy throws that Joe has made, but not one like that went that far. I think the arm strength has definitely seen an increase, and we'll see if the mobility takes a decrease as well.
Yeah, and the great Dan Horde talked about how, and Burrow felt this way as well. I think this Friday practice, he felt it was one of his sharpest to date in terms of how he was throwing, fitting the ball in tight windows, etc. Go check out Dan Horde's Twitter account for that. But, this is also about potentially the weight gain, absorbing these hits over the course of the season, right? And hopefully those lessen. We know that we know that that's the plan. We know that's what everybody wants. The hits lessen, but being able to withstand the hits, because he's not going to fully change how he plays the game. That's not in his DNA. So even if he runs a little less often, or, holds on to the ball less often, he's still going to do it because that's his style of play. That will always be there. We saw that from, Andrew Luck played a very similar style of play. Hopefully the career for Burrow doesn't end up ending prematurely like that, but there's a very backyard style play of football that Burrow has. And so I think, when you can, while we want the hits to lessen and, let's be a little risk averse here, a little more risk averse, it's not really going to happen. So he's doing what he can. How much did he gain? Was it 5 pounds, 10 pounds, something like that? I think it was reported.
He said he was between 215, 220. I'm assuming he was at 210 beforehand.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that sounds about right. So yeah, for me, I think that is withstanding the punishment of the season, and hopefully that's one of those things. And it's a weight gain, weight loss. That's like the training point or training camp talking point, right? I mean, that's always a point that gets discussed. So hopefully it pays off the way we want it to, though.
I think Logan Wilson, this is from Paul Dana Jr. Logan Wilson said yesterday after practicing in the heat of Thursday, he said he lost 8 pounds in just practicing for 2 hours. So he was just drowning himself in fluids and everything like that. So I think your weight definitely fluctuates when you're practicing at the hottest point of the year, and obviously it won't be 90 degrees, hopefully not in September. So it's definitely a variable for now.
Yeah. Well, we've been here almost an hour. We're going to start to get on out of here, I think, but it's been fun. We haven't done this in a long time. As we mentioned, we're going to try and make this more of a regular segment, and you got to get those questions to us when we go live here. So we appreciate all of you. We got this Cincy Jungle feedback. So we got a lot of other people watching us on the Cincy Jungle Twitter, which is awesome. And we are across all of the different platforms. So that is a lot of fun. And we'll be back with more stuff, more interviews, all kinds of different stuff as training camp continues. Preseason starts to commence with the Bengals. Do the thing. Resubscribe to the Believe in Cincy podcast channel. Check out our YouTube channel, The Orange and Black Insider. Check out the Cincy Jungle Facebook page and cincyjungle.com, as well as what John is doing over at A2ZSports.com. He's killing it with the Bengals and AFC North coverage on his own as well. So go check out his stuff. We appreciate all of you. Happy Friday. Have a good weekend. All the things, all the salutations. John, have a good weekend, buddy. I'll see you soon.
You as well.
All right.